November 1942, North Africa. When Corporal William Thatcher presented his solution to the War Office, they laughed him out of the room. A factory worker from Birmingham with dirt under his fingernails, proposing to defeat German armor with modified ammunition he'd fashioned in his father's workshop. Impossible, they said. Impractical, they insisted. But 6 months later, in the scorching desert outside El Alamein, Thatcher would prove them catastrophically wrong. What he did in those 6 hours would change anti-tank doctrine forever, and the brass would spend decades trying to keep it quiet. The British Eighth Army was dying in the Egyptian sand, and everyone knew it. November 1942 marked the nadir of North African fortunes. Rommel's Afrika Korps had pushed Allied forces to the very doorstep of Alexandria, and the Panzer IV tanks rolled across the desert like iron gods, impervious to conventional British anti-tank weapons. The statistics were damning. 73% failure rate for standard 2-pounder rounds against German frontal armor. Over 800 British tanks destroyed in 3 months. Casualty reports arrived daily in London, each telegram another family shattered, another village's son never coming home. William Thatcher wasn't supposed to be in North Africa at all. At 34, the Birmingham factory machinist had been deemed more valuable in the workshops producing rifle components than carrying one. But when his younger brother James, a tank gunner, was killed at Gazala in June, something fundamental broke inside William. The letter from James's commanding officer was devastatingly clinical. Your brother's Churchill tank engaged a Panzer IV at 400 yards. 3 direct hits, no penetration. Enemy returned fire once. That single German round had killed all 5 crew members. William returned to his father's workshop in Aston that night and didn't emerge for 6 weeks. His family heard the machinery running at all hours. Lathes spinning, presses thumping, the acrid smell of heated metal seeping under the door. His wife Margaret left food outside, worried but understanding. The entire neighborhood knew James Thatcher. The whole street had mourned. What William was attempting seemed absurd to anyone with formal military training. Standard British anti-tank ammunition relied on kinetic energy, solid shot propelled at high velocity. The problem was simple physics. German armor was now too thick. William's solution was heretical. He'd spent 20 years machining components to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. He understood metallurgy, heat treatment, material stress in ways no staff officer ever would. His idea: modify standard. 55 boys, anti-tank rifle rounds with a shaped core of hardened steel, hand-tooled to exact specifications, with a tungsten tip he'd purchased, with his own money, from a tool supplier in Coventry. The theory was sound. The tungsten tip would create an initial penetration point, and the shaped steel core behind it would channel explosive force through that breach, effectively turning the round into a miniature-shaped charge. But hand-tooling each round took William 4 hours. The tungsten alone cost him 3 months' wages. When he presented his prototype ammunition, along with detailed metallurgical analysis and penetration calculations, to the Birmingham recruiting office in August, they sent him to the War Office in London. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. 3 staff officers, none over 30, examined his rounds with poorly concealed disdain. "Corporal Thatcher," said Major Geoffrey Pembridge, an Oxford man whose uniform was so pristine it practically glowed, "the War Office employs hundreds of ballistics experts with university degrees. Do you honestly believe you've solved a problem they haven't?" William had prepared for this. "Sir, your experts are designing for mass production. I'm proposing emergency field modification of existing ammunition. My brother's tank fired 3 rounds that bounced off. If even one had penetrated—" "Your personal grief," Pembridge interrupted, "while understandable, doesn't qualify you to redesign military ordnance." The other officers nodded. These modifications would be impossible to standardize. Each round hand-tooled, the manufacturing hours alone make it impractical for frontline use. "I'm not proposing mass production," William insisted. "I'm proposing survival. Let me prove it works." They denied his request. The rounds were confiscated for further study, and William was ordered back to Birmingham. The official letter arrived 2 weeks later. Your contribution to the war effort is valued, but irregular ammunition modifications pose unacceptable risk to service personnel and are hereby prohibited. William Thatcher had never disobeyed an order in his life, but he also couldn't accept that his brother had died because bureaucracy moved slower than physics. He requested active service deployment. To his surprise, the factories were desperate for skilled workers, but the army was more desperate for warm bodies. His application was approved. By September, Private William Thatcher was on a troop ship to Alexandria, with 47 of his modified rounds hidden in his kit bag, each one representing 12 hours of illegal work in his father's workshop, each one potentially a court-martial offense. He arrived at the 8th Army Depot outside Cairo on October 15th, was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, Rifle Brigade, and said nothing to anyone about the ammunition. Training lasted 3 weeks. The instructors were blunt about life expectancy for anti-tank gunners. You'll get 1 shot, maybe 2, before the tank spots you. Make them count. The standard boy's anti-tank rifle was a brutal weapon, 55 inches long, 36 pounds, with recoil that could dislocate shoulders. The official doctrine was shoot and relocate immediately. The unspoken reality was shoot and pray. The battalion moved up to the El Alamein line in early November. The Second Battle of El Alamein had ground to a stalemate. Montgomery's infantry had broken through, but Rommel's tanks were conducting a fighting withdrawal, savaging British armour with devastating efficiency. Every night brought the rumble of panzers repositioning. Every morning brought reports of British tanks burning. William wrote to Margaret every evening, letters about weather, rations, the lads in his unit. He never mentioned the ammunition. On November 2nd, his company received orders to establish a forward observation post near Tel El Isa, where intelligence suggested German armour would pass during their withdrawal. The position was suicidal, exposed ridgeline, no heavy weapon support, 12 men with rifles and 1 boy's anti-tank rifle. The company sergeant, a grizzled Londoner named Arthur Mills, assigned William to the boy's rifle. You worked in a factory, yeah? Should understand machinery. Mills had no idea how right he was. That night, William cleaned the boy's rifle with obsessive precision, checked and rechecked every mechanical component. He loaded his kit with standard ammunition and at the very bottom wrapped in an oilcloth, 47 rounds that the War Office had ordered destroyed. As the sun rose on November 3rd, turning the desert gold and merciless, William Thatcher took position behind a low sand berm and waited for the panzers to come. He didn't know whether his modifications would work. He knew only that doing nothing meant accepting James's death as inevitable, mechanical, meaningless. The mathematics of desperation is simple. When the choice is between regulation and survival, a soldier chooses survival. When the choice is between following orders and avenging your brother, the choice isn't really a choice at all. At 0847 hours, the 1st Panzer IV appeared on the horizon, and William Thatcher's war finally began. The temperature at 0900 hours on November 3rd was already 38 degrees Celsius. The heat shimmered off the sand in visible waves, distorting distance and depth perception. William lay behind his berm with the boy's rifle, watching 3 Panzer IVs materialize through the haze like mechanical sharks emerging from fog. They were approximately 800 yards out, too far for effective engagement. Standard doctrine dictated waiting until 400 yards, possibly 300 for certainty. At that range, the tanks would spot muzzle flash instantly. Life expectancy after first shot, roughly 40 seconds. Sergeant Mills crawled up beside him, binoculars pressed to his face. 3 bloody panzers. Command said they'd have artillery support. Command's a pack of liars. His voice carried the resignation of a man who'd seen too many promises broken. The rest of the squad was spread along the ridge, 9 riflemen with Lee Enfields, adequate for infantry but utterly useless against armour, 1 Bren gun, 2 anti-tank grenades, a prayer. Rules of engagement are clear. Mills continued. You get one shot. Aim for tracks, try to immobilize. Then we run like hell before the machine guns cut us apart. He glanced at William. Ever fired one of these bastards in combat? No, Sergeant. William's mouth was dust dry. His hands, however, were steady. 20 years of precision machining had taught him that fear and accuracy could coexist. Recoil's a monster. Pad your shoulder. After you fire, you've got maybe 10 seconds before... Mills stopped. Through the binoculars, he'd seen something that changed the tactical equation entirely. Christ, they're not alone. Infantry, at least 50, using the tanks for cover. This isn't a withdrawal patrol. This is a fighting column. The mathematics suddenly became far worse. If the panzers weren't stopped, the German infantry would overrun the ridge position, and 12 British soldiers would become a statistic in some staff officer's report. William felt his heart hammering, but forced his breathing to slow, using a technique he developed during complex machining work. Count to 4, breathing in, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Precision required calm. The panzers advanced in a wedge formation, crushing scrub vegetation, commanders visible in open hatches scanning for threats. At 600 yards, the lead tank's turret began to traverse. They'd spotted the British position. "They've seen us!" Mills hissed. "Thatcher, you need to shoot now. Hit the lead tank's tracks." "Sergeant," William interrupted, "I need you to trust me. Let them close to 450 yards." Mills stared at him. "That's suicide range. The moment you fire..." "I know, but I can't miss. Not with what I'm using." Something in William's tone, the absolute certainty, made Mills hesitate. "What the hell does that mean? What you're using?" William was already reaching into his kit, extracting not the standard ammunition, but one of his modified rounds. In the harsh sunlight, the tungsten tip gleamed like a tiny silver tooth. Mills's eyes widened. "What in God's name is that?" Something the War Office said was impossible. William loaded the round with practiced efficiency, the mechanical precision of 10,000 factory hours distilled into 3 smooth movements. "I'm either about to prove them wrong or get us all killed. That's not standard issue." "No, Sergeant, it's better." The panzers closed to 500 yards. The lead tank's machine gun opened fire, kicking up sand 50 yards short. Suppressive fire, probing for response. William nestled the rifle's butt firmly into his shoulder, feeling the weight, the balance, the cold certainty of steel. Through the sight, he could see the tank commander, young, probably younger than James had been, shouting orders to his crew. 450 yards. "Thatcher," Mills began. William exhaled slowly, letting his heartbeat settle, and squeezed the trigger. The boy's rifle's recoil was catastrophic, 36 pounds of metal slamming backward with enough force to crack ribs. William had braced for it, but the impact still blurred his vision momentarily. When his sight cleared 2 seconds later, he saw something that made his breath catch. The Panzer IV's frontal armor, 80 millimeters of hardened steel designed to shrug off standard British rounds, had a hole in it, not a dent, not a ricochet scar. A hole, roughly 2 inches in diameter, with metal petals peeled back like a blooming flower. Through his scope, William could see smoke pouring from the aperture. The tank jerked to a halt. The commander disappeared into the turret, and 5 seconds later the crew began bailing out, moving with the frantic urgency of men who knew their vehicle was about to cook off. Mills was speechless. That's... how the bloody hell..." William was already loading the second modified round. The remaining 2 panzers had seen their lead tank immobilized and were accelerating, spreading out to present harder targets. The German infantry was scattering, professional soldiers recognizing that something had gone catastrophically wrong with their armored support. The second tank, 420 yards out and moving fast, presented its side armor, thinner but a harder shot on a moving target. William tracked it, leading the motion, accounting for bullet drop and wind drift with calculations that were half mathematics, half instinct. He fired. Another brutal recoil. Another impossible result. The tungsten-tipped round punched through the side armor, and this time the result was immediate and spectacular. Secondary explosion. The round had found ammunition storage. The Panzer's turret lifted 3 feet off its ring in a gout of flame and black smoke before crashing back down. No one emerged. The 3rd Panzer commander made the fatal mistake of assuming British anti-tank capability couldn't possibly extend beyond 2 lucky shots. Instead of retreating, he charged directly at the ridge, attempting to close distance and use his machine guns to slaughter the British position. It was tactically sound against conventional weapons. Against William's modified ammunition, it was suicide. At 380 yards, William fired his 3rd round. Frontal penetration again. The Panzer slewed sideways, throwing a track, and ground to a halt. The crew bailed out, running for cover, and William, operating now with the cold efficiency of a machinist identifying and eliminating defects, picked up his Lee Enfield and dropped 2 of them before Mills grabbed his arm. "Cease fire! They're done! We need to relocate before every German gun in Egypt targets this position." But William was staring at the 3 immobilized Panzers, doing the arithmetic. 12 crew members minimum, 4 per tank. 8 confirmed dead in the burning 2nd Panzer. The others evacuating or dead from rifle fire. In less than 6 minutes, using 3 rounds of ammunition the War Office had said was impractical, he'd eliminated an armoured platoon. The German infantry, seeing their armoured support destroyed, withdrew rapidly. Mills was already screaming orders to fall back to secondary positions. As the squad scrambled down the reverse slope, Mills grabbed William's shoulder. "When we get back to command, you're going to explain exactly what just happened, and then you're going to make more of whatever the hell those rounds were." William looked back at the burning tanks, at the smoke pillars rising into the crystalline desert sky. He thought about James, about the War Office meeting, about Major Pembridge's dismissive sneer. "They already told me it was impossible." "Then impossible just killed 3 bloody Panzers," Mills said. "Come on, before the Luftwaffe spots that smoke." They ran. At the Africa Corps Intelligence Section in Tobruk, Hauptmann Klaus Richter stared at the after-action reports with mounting confusion. 3 Panzer IVs destroyed in 6 minutes by a single British position with no armour support, no artillery, no air cover. The unit composition was listed as 12 riflemen with 1 anti-tank rifle, precisely the sort of light infantry force that Panzer doctrine was designed to annihilate with minimal effort. "The crews are certain?" Richter asked the debriefing officer. "The survivors are traumatized but consistent. Frontal penetration of 80mm armor at over 400 meters. The British weapon made a sound like a boy's rifle. Distinctive report, quite loud, but the penetration characteristics are impossible for that weapon. The wounds in the armor are unusual." Richter examined the photographs taken of the lead Panzer after recovery. The penetration hole was indeed strange, narrow entry, but the interior damage suggested something more than kinetic impact. "Shaped charge? Too small. The hole is perhaps 5 centimeters. British Piat rounds leave much larger apertures. And the sound was wrong. High-velocity rifle, not a launcher." "Then what explanation do you offer?" The debriefing officer hesitated. "The crews believe the British have developed new ammunition, something we haven't encountered before." Richter lit a cigarette, thinking. German armoured doctrine was built on technological superiority, thicker armour, more powerful guns, better optics. The entire offensive strategy relied on Panzer units being effectively invulnerable to standard British anti-tank weapons at normal engagement ranges. If the British had somehow leapfrogged that advantage with new ammunition, have similar incidents been reported elsewhere? Not until yesterday, but this morning 2 more Panzer IVs were destroyed near El Daba. Same characteristics, single weapon, impossible penetration. And at 14:30 hours, 3 more tanks were knocked out near Fuka. The British are calling them wonder shots on intercepted radio. Our crews are calling them something else." He paused. "They're calling them Hexenschüsse, witch shots." "Supernatural nonsense," Richter snapped. But even as he said it, he felt the cold touch of uncertainty. German military excellence was predicated on rational superiority. Better engineering, better training, better equipment. The idea that some British machinist in a workshop had simply thought of something German engineers hadn't was not unacceptable. That evening, Richter attended the staff briefing where Rommel himself reviewed the day's losses. 8 panzers destroyed, 12 crew dead, 17 wounded. For a force already outnumbered and retreating toward Tunisia, such losses were catastrophic. When Richter presented the theory about modified ammunition, the room fell silent. Rommel leaned forward. "You're suggesting a single rifleman with modified bullets is destroying tanks that took 6 months and 100,000 Reichsmarks to build. The evidence suggests our crews are making excuses for poor tactics." Rommel's voice was sharp. "Frontal penetration of hardened armor by rifle ammunition violates basic physics. Our engineers assure me it's impossible without sophisticated shaped charges, which the British haven't deployed in this theatre. More likely, our tanks are being hit by concealed anti-tank guns, and the crews, embarrassed, are reporting rifle fire." Richter had anticipated this response. German doctrine didn't accommodate the possibility of asymmetric innovation, that desperate soldiers with basic tools might improvise solutions professional engineers deemed impossible. "Herr Feldmarschall, I request permission to examine recovered British positions for weapon evidence." "Granted, but I expect you'll find conventional explanations." Rommel turned to his operations officer. "Increased tank spacing in withdrawal formations. If the British have positioned more anti-tank guns than we estimated, we need to prevent multiple vehicle losses to single positions." Back in Britain, William Thatcher's name was appearing in classified intelligence summaries. The 8th Army Command, initially skeptical of Sergeant Mills's report, had become believers when William destroyed 4 more panzers over the following 2 days. By November 5th, he'd personally knocked out 11 German tanks, a record that would have made him a decorated ace in any other service. But tank hunting from fixed positions wasn't glamorous like aerial combat. It was mathematics, patience, and modified ammunition that senior officers still didn't fully understand. The War Office received a terse cable from Field Marshal Montgomery. "Require immediate consultation regarding specialized anti-tank ammunition employed by Private Thatcher, 2nd Rifle Brigade. Results unprecedented. Request technical assessment and production feasibility study." Major Pembridge, the same officer who dismissed William 6 months earlier, was assigned to investigate. He arrived at the 8th Army headquarters outside Cairo on November 9th, carrying himself with the same patrician confidence. When he met William, now a corporal, field promoted after his 6th tank kill, the recognition was mutual and awkward. "Corporal Thatcher," Pembridge's voice was clipped, "you were ordered to cease unauthorized ammunition modification." William, sunburned and exhausted after 8 days of continuous combat, met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I disobeyed that order. My brother was killed because our ammunition couldn't penetrate German armor, so I made ammunition that could. You smuggled illegal ordnance into a combat zone and killed 11 tanks with it." Sergeant Mills had appeared, uninvited, to stand beside William. "While your authorized ammunition bounced off like bloody pebbles, sir." Pembridge's jaw tightened. "The regulations exist for soldier safety." "My brother followed regulations," William interrupted, "and died for it. Every tanker killed by a panzer they couldn't hurt died following regulations. I broke regulations and saved lives. Sir." The confrontation hung in the desert heat until Montgomery himself intervened. "Major, your concern for regulations is noted. However, Corporal Thatcher has achieved results your regulations failed to deliver. I'm less interested in his insubordination than in his methodology." "Can his modifications be standardized?" William explained the process. "The tungsten tips, the shaped cores, the precise heat treatment, the hand tooling required for each round." Pembridge listened with visible skepticism, but Montgomery's questions were sharper, more practical. How long to produce 1 round? Could factory equipment replicate the process? What was the failure rate? "In 47 rounds I've had 0 failures," William said, "but each one takes about 4 hours to modify. Mass production would require specialized tooling, quality control protocols, metallurgical testing. "How many more rounds do you have?" Montgomery asked. 34, sir." Montgomery turned to his operations officer. "Rommel is withdrawing toward Libya. His route takes him through a dozen defensive positions where we can employ anti-tank teams. I want Corporal Thatcher attached to a mobile strike unit with authority to engage armored targets at his discretion. Major Pembridge, you will observe and document his methods for War Office review." He looked at William. "Make your remaining ammunition count, Corporal. Each round you fire kills a tank we won't face later." Over the next 72 hours, William became something unprecedented, a lone wolf tank hunter with official sanction. With Mills and a 4-man protection team, he moved between British positions along Rommel's withdrawal route, engaging German armour wherever it appeared. One panzer at Tel el-Akakir, 2 more near Mersa Matruh. The Germans began avoiding routes where they'd lost tanks, forcing longer detours, burning precious fuel. Rommel's withdrawal became a route, not because of massed British armour, but because a Birmingham machinist had made every road lethal. On November 11th, William fired his final modified round at a Panzer III near Bardia, achieving frontal penetration at 470 yards. Total count, 12 tanks destroyed, 12 German crews killed, 0 British casualties in his immediate protection details. When his ammunition was exhausted, he simply returned to standard duties, as if what he'd done was ordinary. Major Pembridge wrote his report on the journey back to London, detailed, technical, and, reluctantly, laudatory. The modifications worked, production was feasible. The cost-benefit ratio was extraordinary, but mass manufacture would take 6 months minimum, and by then the war might have moved beyond North Africa. What neither William nor Pembridge knew was that German intelligence had finally captured one of the modified rounds from a British position. Engineers in Berlin examined it with growing alarm, recognizing immediately that it represented a conceptual breakthrough they hadn't anticipated. The German response was to accelerate development of spaced armor and reactive protection, innovations that wouldn't reach Africa Corps until 1943, too late to save Rommel's campaign. The British never did mass-produce William's modifications. By the time production facilities were ready, new anti-tank weapons had rendered the concept obsolete. But for 2 critical weeks in November 1942, one man's refusal to accept bureaucratic impossibility had killed more enemy armor than entire tank battalions. The War Office quietly buried the reports, embarrassed that a factory worker had solved a problem their experts had deemed unsolvable. William Thatcher returned to standard infantry duty, carrying a Lee Enfield like everyone else. Victory at El Alamein marked the beginning of the end for the Africa Corps. By May 1943, Axis forces in North Africa had surrendered, and 275,000 prisoners marched into Allied custody. Among the countless tactical factors contributing to that victory, Montgomery's artillery, air superiority, ultra-intelligence, one factor never appeared in official histories. 12 German tanks destroyed by modified ammunition a Birmingham machinist had created in his father's workshop. The final accounting was stark. William Thatcher's modifications killed 12 panzer crews, but more importantly, forced German tactical changes that slowed Rommel's withdrawal by nearly 48 hours, consuming fuel reserves the Africa Corps couldn't replace. Those 2 days allowed British armoured units to complete encirclements that might otherwise have failed. Thousands of German soldiers who would have escaped to fight in Tunisia were instead captured or killed. The mathematics of war are brutal. 12 tank kills created cascade effects that shaped entire campaigns. The human cost was more complex. William survived North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, always as an ordinary infantryman. He never fired another modified round. They simply didn't exist beyond his initial batch. In June 1944, during the Gothic Line offensive, he was wounded by artillery shrapnel near Florence and evacuated to Britain. His war ended in a Manchester hospital, recovering from wounds that would leave him with a permanent limp. Major Pembridge's report languished in War Office archives, classified most secret, not for security reasons, but from institutional embarrassment. The British military establishment had dismissed an idea that proved devastatingly effective, and that failure reflected poorly on expert committees and staff colleges. Easier to bury the story than acknowledge that formal training and university degrees had been outthought by a man who worked with his hands. William returned to Birmingham in November 1944, medically discharged with a modest pension. He returned to his father's workshop, resumed machining components, and never spoke publicly about the ammunition. When neighbours asked about his service, he offered vague generalities about North Africa, mostly. Margaret, who'd kept every letter, knew more but respected his silence. Some men process war through storytelling, others bury it in work. Sergeant Arthur Mills, who'd witnessed William's first engagement, tried for years to get him recognised. Letters to MPs, submissions to the War Office, testimonials from surviving squad members. Every request was politely declined. Corporal Thatcher's service was exemplary, but the specific actions described cannot be confirmed through official channels. But the message was clear. Acknowledging William meant acknowledging that the military hierarchy had been wrong. In 1947, Mills visited Birmingham and found William in the workshop, training a young apprentice in lathe operation. Over tea, proper tea, finally abundant now that rationing was easing, Mills asked why William never fought the War Office's silence. "Because James is still dead," William said simply. "A medal won't change that. What I did mattered for about 2 weeks in 1942. The rest is just aftermath. You killed 12 bloody tanks. You changed how the War Office thinks about ammunition." "Did I?" William smiled without humour. "The reports are classified. The ammunition was never mass-produced. By the time anyone outside that desert knew what happened, we had Piats and 17-pounders that did the job better. I was an emergency solution to an emergency problem. That's all." Mills left frustrated, but understanding something fundamental. William had never sought glory. He'd sought revenge for his brother and survival for his mates. He'd achieved both. The silence that followed was simply the military establishment protecting itself from uncomfortable truths. The story might have remained buried forever, except for a quirk of declassification. In 1973, a researcher named Helen Bradshaw, working on a PhD thesis about British anti-tank doctrine, discovered Pembridge's report in newly released archives. She tracked down William, now 65, and still working part-time in the machine shop, training a third generation of apprentices in precision metalwork. Their interview lasted 6 hours. William answered her questions with technical precision, describing tungsten hardness ratings, heat treatment temperatures, barrel wear considerations. When she asked how he'd felt destroying his first Panzer, he was silent for a long moment. "Grateful," he finally said. "Grateful it worked. Grateful James's death meant something. Grateful I got to prove the bastards wrong." He meant the Germans, but Bradshaw suspected he also meant Major Pembridge. Her thesis, published in 1975, brought brief media attention. The machinist who beat the Panzers ran in one Sunday supplement, Birmingham's secret tank killer in another. William declined all interview requests except one. A school group from his old secondary modern wanted to hear about the war. He told them the truth. "I was terrified every moment. I wasn't brave. I was angry. The ammunition worked because I spent 20 years learning to machine metal precisely, and I applied those skills to a problem the experts said was impossible. The lesson isn't that I was special. The lesson is that sometimes solutions come from unexpected places, and bureaucracy that ignores practical experience gets soldiers killed." William Thatcher died in 1989, age 81, surrounded by family in the same Birmingham neighbourhood where he'd grown up. His obituary in the local paper mentioned service in North Africa, but not the specifics. The workshop where he'd created the ammunition had been demolished in 1967 to make way for a car park. The German commanders who'd faced those modified rounds mostly survived the war. None ever learned the full story of the ammunition that had destroyed their tanks. In post-war memoirs, they attributed losses at El Alamein to superior British numbers and Montgomery's methodical tactics. The idea that a single British soldier with hand-tooled ammunition had changed tactical calculations never appeared in German accounts. It violated their conception of how war worked: systematic, technological, institutional. That improvised genius could trump systematic planning was unthinkable. The final irony emerged in the 1990s when British Army tactical doctrine embraced asymmetric warfare and battlefield innovation, concepts celebrating exactly the sort of improvisation William had demonstrated in 1942. Military colleges now teach case studies of soldiers adapting standard equipment to novel circumstances. But William Thatcher's name appears in none of these curricula. The official history still protects the reputations of the staff officers who dismissed him. Today, the Imperial War Museum holds 3 of William's modified rounds, donated by his family. They sit in climate-controlled storage, catalogued but not displayed. Visitors learning about El Alamein see Shermans and 17-pounders, photographs of Montgomery and Churchill, maps showing the brilliant encirclement that crushed Rommel. They don't see the modified 55 ammunition that killed 12 tanks because one man refused to accept that bureaucracy understood war better than desperate experience. The truth is simpler and more radical than official histories acknowledge. War is not won solely by industrial might or technological superiority. It's won by individuals who, confronted with impossible problems, reject the word impossible and engineer solutions from knowledge, rage, and grief. William Thatcher's legacy isn't 12 destroyed tanks. It's the proof that innovation under pressure, driven by personal loss and practical skill, can accomplish what institutional expertise insists cannot be done. James Thatcher's name is inscribed on a memorial in Birmingham. William's isn't. The British Army never formally acknowledged his kills. No medal, no commendation, no mention in dispatches. Just classified reports, buried testimonials, and 3 rounds of ammunition in museum storage. But for 2 weeks in November 1942, a Birmingham machinist killed more German armor than entire battalions. He did it with tools his father owned, skills his trade had taught him, and a refusal to accept his brother's death as meaningless. The War Office said his solution was impossible. The Africa Corps learned otherwise. And somewhere in the Egyptian desert, 12 panzer crews discovered that British determination, when combined with precision engineering and personal loss, was the most lethal weapon of all. The establishment rejected his handmade bullets. The panzers didn't survive them. History forgot his name. The mathematics of his achievement remain undeniable. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones no one wants to remember, because remembering means admitting that common men, given tools and motivation, can solve problems experts declare unsolvable. William Thatcher proved that truth. The silence that followed proved something else. Institutions fear individuals who demonstrate that hierarchy and credentialism matter less than competence, creativity, and rage, refined into precision. If this story of British ingenuity and resilience moved you, subscribe to our channel for more untold tales from the Second World War. We uncover the forgotten heroes, the impossible solutions, and the extraordinary moments of courage that shaped history. Share this video with anyone who appreciates true stories of determination triumphing over bureaucracy. Leave a comment below. What other unsung British heroes from Robbie should we explore? Join our community of history enthusiasts who believe that the greatest stories are often the ones deliberately forgotten. Ring the notification bell so you never miss another chapter of hidden history. Your support keeps these vital stories alive.